Hello, I am Zach with Studio MPL, and today I'm going to be showing you how to design a keychain in Tinkercad. So Tinkercad's super easy to use. There are basically 5 or 6 different steps, and the combination of those steps is how you go from designing something really simple to something really advanced. But today we're going to be doing something really simple. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new design. Now, the important thing with 3D modeling is always controlling your perspective, so the angle at which you're looking at what you're designing. So in Tinkercad, there's a few different ways you can do that. So if we're going to grab our box here, set it on the work plane. Now, if you have a mouse, you can use the right click and hold it down to just rotate or orbit around the object. I find that's really useful and easy to look at something from multiple perspectives. If you don't have a mouse or you don't like doing it that way, you have up here on the left-hand side, you have a series of navigation tools. So we can select the corner of this cube. That'll look at the corner, top, front, etc. Also, if we get sort of super zoomed in, or for some reason kind of lose our perspective, we can always select this house symbol here, and that's home view, and that'll bring us right back to a sort of three-quarter view. This one down at the bottom will give us a isometric view, which is useful when you're looking at dimensions of objects. This one here will show us what we have selected. So if we have, say, 2 boxes and we have them selected, the selection view will zoom in on those, and then the plus and minus are just zoom in, zoom out. You can also control that with your scrolling wheel on the mouse. So the reason why perspective is so important is when you're dealing with things in 3 dimensions, you can look at them from one way, and let's say we're building a little house. We have our box here for the house, put our roof on top of it. It can kind of look like it's on top of it, you know, from one angle, and then when you rotate, you see that they're nowhere near each other, especially if they are kind of skewed in size. You can change the perspective. So you want to always be orbiting your object. So today, we're just going to make a really simple keychain using a base and the text tool. So the first tool we're going to learn is scale. So if we select our object and put it on the work plane, we have 5 squares here, which are all scale points. So if we grab those out, we can now skew it and change the size of it. If we hold down Shift while we do it, it will maintain its proportions. So we can scale it up and down proportionately. But we actually want to make it short and wide for a base. So we're going to use one of these corners to scale it out, and then we're going to use, you can see that it's 20 millimeters tall, because if we select that scale point, it shows us 20 to the side. We're going to shrink that down to about 3. We can also, if we don't want to eyeball it, we can select the dimensions on the right side and just type 3 into it and hit return. And now you have a base that is 3 millimeters by 3 millimeters tall and 21 by 58. No, sorry, 28 by 58 wide and long. So now that we have our base there, I'm going to get that just to the right size, and then we're going to scroll down here on the other side. So look at, these are our various shapes that we can work with. We're going to select this one that says text. That's our text tool. In the text, we're going to type what we want our keychain to stay. In this case, Studio MPL. It's obviously too big. So we're going to scale it down. So we're going to grab a corner and hit Shift. Scale that down. So I'm going to go a little bit smaller with it. And then one thing we can do is sort of move it over the base plate, but we want it perfectly lined up. So what the next tool I'm going to show you is the alignment tool. So the alignment tool is up here. You can't do anything with it because we don't have anything selected, so it's not highlighted. But if we select two objects, which we can do by either dragging a selection box over it and selecting two, or we can hold down Shift, select one, select the other, select one, select the other, and then now you can see that we have our group tool is highlighted, our alignment tool, and our mirror tool. So we want to align it. So what we're going to do is select that, and you can see that these different vertices show up. And if we hover over those, they'll show us different lines that it will align to. So we could align them from the top, we could align them from the bottom. If we look at it this way, we could align them along the Z-axis. But we want to align them, center them on X and Y. So we're going to select this one, which centers it that way, and this one, which centers it that way. So first on X and then on Y. Now that we have those together, we can see that were we to send this to the 3D printer, it's all going to come out as a solid color, a solid whichever filament we're printing with, so whichever plastic we're printing with. Which means for the letters to show up, there needs to be a relief. So they need to be at a different height than the base. So we can either, so using that top scale point, we can either shrink down the base. We're going to shrink that to 2, and then actually we want this a little bit bigger as well. There we go. And when we scaled it, we might have gotten it off alignment, so we're going to line it up again. Now the next thing that we're going to do is group them together. So I'm going to select both of them, use the group tool up here. So what that does is now we have a single object created grouped from the two objects. So now I can scale it, change the size, manipulate it all as a single object without having to worry about them coming separated. So now that we have our kind of base and our text on there, the next thing that we're going to do is add a hole to it. So the hole tool is interesting, and it's one of the unique properties of this program or this app that allows us to make more complicated objects. So we can select any object over here, and I'll select 2 just to kind of show you. So over here we have an option to change the color, which, like I said, doesn't matter when it comes time to print, but it matters. It shows up in the app. We can even make those transparent if we want by selecting this here. That way, if we're trying to sort of line things up or overlap them, we could sort of see what the overlap is if we needed to in the design. But what the other option we have is we're going to make these both solid again, except with the cylinder here, instead of having a solid color right there, we're going to select hole, which is just next to it. And what that does is it turns the cylinder from positive to negative space. So when we group it together, instead of adding it, it will be subtracting it. So when I select both of these, When I select both of these and group them, you can see it carves the cylinder out of the square rather than adding it to it. So if I were to, up here is the undo button, so if I was to go back and then make that solid again and group them, it's added them together. That has made a new object out of both of them. But now if I were to undo it again, do whole and group them, it carves it away. So that's how we make more complicated shapes, is by adding stuff together and then subtracting it. But for these purposes, we're going to get rid of that. And just for today's design, we're going to use the cylinder tool. I'm going to make it tall so that when I shrink it down, we still have enough to go all the way through the base. So I always make sure, so this big black arrow is at the top or bottom is how you raise or lower it. So I always make sure that it's long enough to go all the way through. I'm going to use the arrow keys on my keyboard to move it around, to nudge it over. That's another instance where perspective is really important, is when you're looking at something, depending on what angle you're looking at it, is the angle that you can use the arrows to nudge it in. So now I'm going to select whole, group them together, and it cut a little circle in our keychain. And now we're ready to print.